I'm here with Larry Bodine, and Larry, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And Larry, I've known you for many years, and I've known of you and followed you for, I would say, at least 2 decades. You were an early influencer in my career in terms of how I thought about marketing my practice and generating business, and really conducting myself publicly with integrity as an attorney. And so I want to start this off by saying thank you for that early influence.
Oh, you're
The
more than
the
welcome.
career the career direction that you've inspired in me, and I know that I'm not alone in that, is very much appreciated. Without you having done what you did, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Dan. And I remember how we met. Somehow we met on LinkedIn, I think.
Hmm.
And then I contacted you and said, hey, let's go out for coffee. And we did that. And it's been off to the races ever since.
Yeah, we had the great fortune to find ourselves in Tucson, Arizona at the same time, whereas you had had most of your career in Chicago, in New York, in Boston, and I was in Seattle and Phoenix, and it came together, right place, right time. Um, you recently announced your retirement, um, and I think your career is something to celebrate. And what I'd like to do today is talk about Larry and you know what what you've done in your career, but also what led you to the path that you took, what inspired your values and everything. And for the audience, and I'm going to turn this over to you, Larry, and I want you to do most of the talking, but just for quick background, Larry's career has spanned, he's a lawyer, but he's been a reporter for the New York Daily News. He's been an assistant editor for the National Law Journal. He's been a practicing attorney. He's been the director of communications in a large law firm. He's been an editor and publisher at several legal publications, including Lawyers USA, LexisNexis. He was the editor in chief of lawyers.com for several years. He's been with Mass Torts Nexus. He's been with National Trial Lawyers, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And he's been a close advisor at Lawlytics as well, and he's maintained his own consultancy throughout much of that. So, Larry, let's talk about where you got started. And you and I have had many conversations about your upbringing and your parents and how they influenced you. And so I'd like to start wherever it makes sense for you, but I want to make sure that the audience hears, kind of your origin story.
Sure. Well, I grew up primarily in Sioux City, Iowa. My dad was the city manager. And what I learned from him is it is possible to have a job and love your job, which he did. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, typical 1940s dad, he was all about duty and discipline, kind of a drill master. He told me some things I'll never forget, like never make a decision out of fear and, duty above, your own personal life. He was a guy who loved words. He would write them in a little notepad, and at dinner time when we were kids, he would quiz us and put together these long sentences with words you'd never heard of. And, we memorized them and learned them, and that in turn gave me a love for words. I never really had to study for any vocabulary tests because I learned everything at home. And he was also a guy who read voraciously.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom was a foreign-born citizen, naturalized American, and She taught me basically that you need to study and learn things. She was someone who knew 4 languages and could read and write and speak in all of them. She taught me kindness, especially kindness to animals. She was extremely good at listening. And, being a teenager at one point, I had a lot of stuff to complain about. But she taught me compassion, which is basically, sort of listening with an open heart and identifying with the other person. And she also read voraciously. So by the time I was in 6th grade, I noticed that I had this kind of knack for writing. And my parents saw me handwriting all these stories that I would just make up. And so they finally got me a typewriter. And as I was hunting and pecking, and so they said, well, you need to learn how to touch type. And so they sent me to the high school typing class. So I was a 6th grader among seniors and other people who were, going out to
Oh, wow.
college or start their
Uh-huh.
careers. And uh, and it was
Wow.
something that persisted with me my entire life. Even now, I still love to write. I love to, get into a situation or do some research and try to make sense out of it, and then present it in a highly readable and engaging way. And it's one of the knacks that has served me very well.
And you set the tone early on for how to communicate in that way using the internet as a medium. And I want to get there eventually, but before we do, I want to go back to your dad for just a moment. You've for a long time you've had a desk at the law analytics office where you've come periodically, and you'd when we before COVID, when we'd have team lunches, you were always part of the team lunches and all that. And you've got a plaque from your dad on your desk. And do you remember what it says?
Yes, there's no limit to what can be accomplished if it doesn't matter who gets the credit. He had that sign on his desk for pretty much, all of his life. And of course, what I got out of that is, the object is to get something done. It's not to self-aggrandize yourself. And so if you could make someone else think it was their idea and give them credit for it, they'll be delighted, and, I'll be able to get something done. So that was one lesson I adopted early.
Well, and it's really shown throughout at least the career of yours that I've had the privilege of observing, including how you've mentored people, how you've, as an editor, how you've gotten really the very best out of people that reported to you, that submitted information to you. And I saw that when we collaborated on doing various CLEs and webinars together as well. So how did you develop that skill? I mean, because it's one thing to say it, right? But then, there's egos, there's, careers, there's, there's just the human dynamics. And you seem to have been able to balance really going to the highest levels in what you've done in your career while still maintaining that mentality and really bringing those around you up with you. So how did you get there? Is that something your dad taught you?
That's it's a little bit hard to pin down, but I suppose it goes back to, again, when I was a kid. I was kind of short and dumpy and kind of shy. I was a real nerd. I'd rather memorize a series of, pictures of clouds and bird names and that sort of thing than socialize with people. Mm-hmm. And at one point in my life, especially when I became a newspaper reporter, I realized that I'm going to have to be able to socialize with people and talk to people. And that's where I learned that the best way to start a conversation and get people to like you is to ask questions. In other words, never sort of push your thoughts on it, but find out what the other person's got going on in their life and ask them about it. So I would later in life frequently go to conferences and sort of realized that, gee, nobody really ever asked anything about me. I spent the whole time asking other people about them, but that was the point. That was something that people liked, and coupled with that, and I would draw on this from my mother, I always tried to find something in other people that I liked. Pretty much everybody has a decent spark or some kind of an admirable skill, and it may be untrained, it may be rough around the edges, it's probably not polished, but I could take someone, like say someone else's article, and see what they were getting at it, and then reorganize it and present it in a way that reflected them the best. And every now and then just add a few, touches here and there, a few decorations and improvements. And they were stunned, they would say, oh, I actually got compliments as an editor, because most of the editors I met were like pretty gruff people, someone in the New York Daily newsroom sneaking a sandwich out of the drawer and smoking a cigarette and just kind of going like, what you did here is crap. It's blah, blah, blah. And fix this and that and this and that. And then my story was beautiful. So I just took out the sort of harsh part of it and made it easier for people to accept suggestions that I would make.
So contrast what it was like on the floor of the first newspaper that you worked at in dealing with those kind of editors. I'm picturing like ashtrays, smell of cigarettes and coffee, the clacking of keyboards, the barking of editors, and maybe people running in with scoops, running messengers. I don't I probably got that from a movie, but what did it look like?
It was exactly what you described. It was,
oh yeah,
just a big open room with a linoleum floor, and they would just push a bunch of desks together. So, while I was riding or on the phone talking to somebody, there would be 3 other people right next to me doing the same thing. And for me, it was just a dream come true. This was like the thrill that I had been looking for. It was every day I went to work and I had no idea what I was going to be doing, but I was sure it was going to be exciting, or I would meet somebody or learn something. The best example was when I called the New York Daily News saying that, they were closing down all the buildings where I was because a storm was coming up the coast. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, that's good, close it, but we want you to drive into the storm and report from there.
And did you?
And for me, it was so much fun because, I knew how to write, and they were teaching me how to write better, and they would publish me instantly and put my name on it. And then the best thing was, at the end of the week, you'd go to the paymaster window and they would give you money. And I just thought, this is like stealing. It's just too good to be true.
That's the best kind of job to have. So did they pay by the inch or by the word, or how did it work back then?
No, you had to file a story a day, and then
okay.
You got a flat weekly rate.
Okay.
Believe it or not, it started out at $85 an hour. I couldn't even afford a car or an apartment.
Wait, an hour or a week? Wait, an hour or a week? Okay. I just wanted to add some. Yeah. I thought I knew what you meant there. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a week or a month though. So, and for context, this is the mid 70s, right?
Yeah, it started in 1972. Back in the dark ages, and it was also the golden era of newspapers. Woodward and Bernstein were breaking news stories. Journalism was just one of the most exciting fields to get involved in, and so. At one point, I noticed everybody else was making $100 a week, and that didn't sit with me well. So I took one of my very best stories and went into the bigger paper, and ended up getting paid $200 a week because I presented a story to them. I said, if you had me working for you, you would have had this story, and they liked that pitch. They liked sort of young, aggressive guys. And then I did the same thing when I got on the New York Daily News later in the 70s. And I just said, you got a great guy covering this particular area, but here, look at all the stories he missed. There's this one and this one and that one. And if you had me, I could be doing all this for you. and it was a pitch that worked.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and so you talked about Woodward and Bernstein. How influential was the whole Watergate event on you wanting to be a journalist and on journalism in general back then?
Oh, I thought it was sort of the best combination of, being a commentator and sort of a spy, in the sense that you had your own secret sources, unnamed sources told you something. But if you took that route, you better be sure you had the facts exactly right. So that was the bottom line. The facts had to be absolutely, positively correct. And it was just fascinating how they pretty much worked as detectives and developed Deep Throat as a source and made a real difference in society. And that's what I was in it for. Was I wanted to make things better. I wanted to be a news reporter that caused some sort of a positive change. And uh, one short story I'll tell you was there was I was covering the Jersey Shore, and there was a fire, and all four people in the fire died, and it turned out that they were all mentally handicapped, which struck me as odd because this wasn't any sort of a facility; it was just an apartment house on the shore.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, it turned out there was a landlord who was basically cashing their Social Security checks uh, and other government checks to support them to live, and they just dumped them into a fire trap. And it turned out there was a network of landlords doing the same thing all across the region. And I started going out to some of these houses and just talking to people. Anybody could walk in the yard or the house, and there were people who had no idea where they were. So we got pictures of the little hovels that the tenants lived in. And then I would drive out to the mansions where the landlords were. And they were mansions. And I'd knock on their doorbell or ring their doorbells and try to get them to talk. They put all sorts of pressure on me, not to write my articles. But I stuck with it. I started a state investigation and won a journalism award, one of seven. And this one came with $1,000 prize, which back then was big money. But
When
the
you,
reason I did it was it made me feel good. I was making the world a better place. I accomplished something. I did something with the talents that were just inborn.
when you talk about pressure in that situation, um, I'm given location, given the story, given the era, I'm thinking like mob type scene. Did you ever feel in danger as when you were a reporter, like physical danger?
Yeah, but I thought I was invincible. I was in my 20s, and it was just like, good luck taking out a reporter or a reporter like me. It's just not going to happen.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, in one story, I actually did deal with a mob where a shopping center kept having all of their garbage dumpsters being stolen repeatedly. So I looked into it, and it was the kind of thing I found out covering municipal court. So I contacted the owner of the shopping center and some of the stores, and they said, well, there's a certain Black Hand organization that wants us to use their garbage service, and they keep stealing our garbage trucks. And pieced the whole thing together and came out with a sort of a big expose on how the mob was muscling into this lovely little community and strong arming merchants. And that, by the way, was the story that got me from the local paper where I was getting $85 an hour to the Star Ledger where I pretty much doubled my pay.
And then from there to the New York Daily News.
Yep.
It seems like that would have been the most exciting time to be a reporter. I want to get back to your career and how it progressed. You went on to law school. You went on to have a career that kind of blends journalism and law. But before we do that, I'm very interested in your opinion on or your observations on how journalism has changed, both in print and in broadcast media between then and now. Now, I'm too young to remember, the times that you were talking about. I was around, but was very young. But I remember, early, like I remember 9/11, and watching Aaron Brown report that, and then watching Aaron Brown hand off to Larry King, or maybe it was vice versa. And that's kind of the last memory that I have of what at least seemed to me like kind of the old school journalism with integrity. And I'm curious if you have similar observations, or like how that's progressed in your mind, because you have a much higher altitude view than I have.
Well, I think you raise a pertinent question. When I was a newspaper reporter, it was to some extent considered a public service. You had a duty to the public. You had a duty to tell both sides of the story. The facts had to be absolutely verifiable. And, if you didn't cover both sides of a dispute, that the ignored party would get a hold of you and call you to task, rightfully so. So that's pretty much what I grew up with. And the key thing was that, it had to be based in facts, and there could be no politics in it. It was just tell the story for what it is. And gosh, since I'd say the last 10 years, the media has become highly polarized. You can even get charts that show you, well, these publications are way off on the left end, and then you go into the center, and you get network news, which the main networks tend to be in the center, and then off to the other side where there are extreme viewpoints as well. And to me, it's a huge disappointment, because they're not telling both sides of the story. They're not trying to be objective. It's opinion page journalism. They're trying to make a point, and they'll cherry pick the facts to make their point, or I should say what they claim to be facts. And then, a lot of what they're talking about, they'll publish conspiracy theories, which just completely horrifies me. I don't want conspiracy theories. I just want to know, what's taking place for real. And as a result, now I read multiple newspapers and podcasts and TV shows to get the news, but I have to work at it. I have to discern what the truth is, because so much of it is slanted today.
You kind of have to be your own journalist today,
Yeah.
and curate the information. Like I find myself, if I listen to one source on one side and then another source on another side, it's like all I know is that they both sound like bullshit, and it's really hard to tell. But then I talk with people that listen to the exact same thing, and they're so convinced that they know exactly what's going on because they've heard this one conspiracy theory or spin on it. And I think that the way that it used to be presented train people to think critically about things. And it seems like we've kind of lost that either ability or drive as a society recently. And do you agree with that?
Yes. And I could sort of pin the date to, pretty much when AOL made it so that everybody could get the internet. And then gradually over time, people started to we got away from the fact that a print newspaper was your only source of information. When I was a reporter, TV stations would sit there and read the paper and read the paper. That was the source of news. But then the internet came along and social media, and it sort of became a place where you could say everything you want. There was the advent of blogging, which I was part of, and I just thought this is fantastic. Everybody's got their own printing press, and I started blogging in. Well, let me go back. I started the Law Marketing Portal website in 1991 and published news about marketing events and tips and practical advice. Started a listserv, law marketing listserv in 96. And then I started my own blog in 2004. And it's gotten over 1 million visitors. And the whole notion that basically I can just tell you my opinion, based on, what I've seen, and I'm, going to give you my perspective on it. And that's different from journalism. From journalism, it's like, here are the facts, you decide. But with a lot of blogging, you see, someone saying, I looked at the facts and here's my takeaway. Here's my opinion about it. And that's kind of what led to, all the kind of the online madness. Social media and the internet and blogging have really destroyed journalism.
I was afraid you were going to say that, and I have to agree. And the reason why I was afraid you were going to say that is because I owe 100% of my career as it's evolved to the existence of the internet. And between my own law practices and between attorneys that have used the two technology companies that I've created, I'm sure that through the internet, I've been a part of generating well over $1 billion in legal fees. And I imagine you're there and probably even more. But when you think about it, when you say the advent of AOL and everybody being able to get online, when we were dependent on print journalism, it was a slower pace, and you had the ability and the time to go and fact check things. And now it's kind of just, you got to throw it out there and be first and then retract it later or not, and just wait till something else kind of covers it up. And I don't think it's healthy. I think is this a reversible problem? Is there a way to have the internet but also have a reliable source of truth out there?
I think so. I may have exaggerated when I said it's destroyed journalism. It's more fractured it.
I don't disagree with you. I agree with the word destroyed. At least from what it was, but it's a matter of degrees. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the internet has just made it possible for people to get information about any topic by just doing a Google search. There are online databases about people. You can pretty much find out anything about anybody. But you just as you wouldn't go into a crowd and there were a whole bunch of people talking, everybody had a different opinion, and just sort of latch onto one that confirmed a pre-existing notion. I tend to look for people who have credibility to begin with, and I'll follow them over time. And if I find that what they're saying is accurate, I'll stick with that. And that's where the saving grace is. I think there's a real thirst for knowing the truth. There always has been. But you can't just sort of, go on Facebook and presume that everything you read there that's called news is actually that. You need to find out who, the history or the slant or lack thereof of someone who's telling you what's going on, which was to turn the page a little bit, which was one of the things that attracted me about law. I was always interested in. It started out with ordinances. We had a curfew when I was in high school, and everybody hated it. And so I went downtown and looked up the actual language of the curfew and wrote an article in the school paper about, well, this is what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the vague parts, and here's the black and white parts. And it just flowed directly into writing briefs or writing complaints. I never had any problem with signing a complaint that everything was a verifiable fact. Uh, you couldn't make up the law. I mean, you had to find a statute or an opinion that supported your point of view, and and the judges wouldn't tolerate anything less than that. If it was BS, you'd get smoked out, and the bar is a small place. Everybody knows everybody, and you either develop a reputation as somebody who's credible and effective, or somebody who's just I don't know, trying to scare up clients and make a buck.
Yeah, well, when you sign your name on something that you file in court, I mean, there's still that accountability. There's not on the internet, and I think it's great when we can find these sources of truth that we know are reliable and acting with integrity. But do you worry at all about those in younger generations who don't have that anchoring in objective, two-sided, report the whole story type truth that might suffer from confirmation biases that they don't even know that they have because they just haven't been exposed to the other side of an issue or a set of facts or argument?
Oh, most definitely, yes. I think people have gotten very lazy about their news. They just subscribe to a newsletter, or they plug in some sources on Facebook and just get that. And it becomes sort of an echo chamber where, people have sort of a vague notion and they look online for something that confirms that notion, regardless of what the facts are. And I can always tell that with, people who will just go on and on and on about a topic, I don't know, say that they don't trust vaccines or something like that, or, it's got nanobots in it that communicate with 5G poles, and it's sent to a computer that is designed to control your mind. And I would tell people, it's just like, that's not true. That's completely bogus. There's no evidence to support that. Somebody just made that up. And I find people who are impervious to facts, which I think would completely
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I like that phrase, impervious to facts.
My dad, because he was always Mr. Rational. Don't make a decision based on emotions. And he gave me a healthy respect for the facts. But I don't know how to convince somebody if they won't listen to the facts, or consciously disregard it. I don't know. They're following some sort of ism that they've just latched onto, and whatever's in that. It's kind of like Scientology. It's like, well, whatever they tell you, that's what you believe.
Well, and I think a lot of them cite sources that don't say what they say the sources say. So they'll hold up, look at this report that says this thing about, you use the example about vaccines. So it says this about these vaccines. The study has been done that says this, and it was reported in the journal of whatever, that and it might have that keyword in there. And so somebody that is just kind of hanging onto that confirmation bias, if they look at it, they see that word and they're like, okay, it was cited. So why would somebody cite something that doesn't say what they said it says? Somebody would call them out on it, but they're not really listening to the sources that are calling them out on it, or reading it enough for themselves to understand it. They're just being kind of spoon fed this agenda. I see it happening everywhere, and it's
insidious. There's a
Eh?
lot of propaganda out there, that has a particular slant on things, and it's not designed to inform you. It's designed to persuade you. And
Exactly.
they're written very cleverly. You know, uh, you know, every conspiracy theory will have like a half a dozen facts in it that people will
Hmm.
point to and go like, well,
Exactly.
look, that little piece there took place. And then you say, yeah, but the journal that you're citing, depublished that opinion, and the doctor is no longer in medical practice, yet people keep citing this guy. And somehow you didn't know that. So I
Yep.
just write it off to intellectual laziness that coupled with the fact that just people aren't all that engaged in public affairs anymore. They're keeping their headphones, keeping their eyes down, looking at the last text message that they got, and it's not a big enough concern for them to be able to speak from facts.
I feel
But
like
I can
people are.
remember even as a teenager, I would just sort of say something I'd heard, and then the other person, might come back and go like, "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't even know what the words mean that you just used. You just picked that up from somewhere." And it was like, "Wow, nailed me." I didn't know the facts. I didn't check it out, and I took the attitude from that point forward that if I said something, I would be able to refer back to the source that in which I read it, and I would be able to reproduce it, which of course fit fine in journalism and fit very well in law practice. But it requires some intellectual honesty, intellectual effort.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a very real sense of the lobster is being boiled, the crab is being boiled slowly, and doesn't know it's being boiled because you get this story on Facebook, and it's a bullshit story that somebody shared, but you like it because it's your friend or your acquaintance or somebody that you respect liked it, and you're like, gives you that dopamine hit, gives the person that you liked it, that wrote it, the dopamine hit, perpetual circle there. And then, oh shit, all these people that I really respect liked this bullshit thing. And then all of a sudden it becomes, well, my cousin who has a PhD liked it, and I know he's a smart guy, so I'm going to just trust that. It seems like there's so much like technological damage that we've done to critical thinking.
Well, that's right. And critical thinking are, the key words here. People have, begun to associate information with entertainment. If somebody said something outrageous, you go click, I like that because I had a reaction to it, or it came in a meme that I thought was clever. I'm going to like that, and share it on Facebook, tweet it out, put it up on Instagram, and so forth. And the whole gamification of information has taken place, where the whole point is not to be informed, not to learn the facts, but just have a good time reading something because it was written in a really jokey way, or it was propaganda and it was very subtly and carefully written with premeditation, and it sucked you in and you didn't even know it.
Well, and this technology is designed to separate us as a community while giving us the illusion that we are more of a community. And I think we get that togetherness by groupthink, and it's naturally like dividing us into factions
Yeah,
as
very,
well.
very
I mean,
true.
it's
It's made it easier to find, the internet has made it easier for people to find other like-minded people. And by the fact that, dint to the fact that you're part of a group, that sort of gives you credibility to their viewpoint, which they're going to support with more and more propaganda. And it takes away the critical thinking of it. Um, the technology is not to blame, any more than the telephone, didn't destroy humanity because everybody could suddenly talk to each other, or the movies, or YouTube, or anything like that. It's the people behind it So it really makes a difference who is saying what. You really need to, uh,
Yeah.
you need to investigate where the information is coming from before you can trust it, and
Yeah, you
then
can.
be critical about it. It's like, well, does this person have a reason that they're saying this? Are they trying to make a point? Are they making money from it? Are they, are they just trying to attract followers and attract likes?
Yeah, it's like nuclear. It can be a source of medicine. It can be a source of energy, and it can also end the world.
Right.
Um, I've I've found that as it's a nice little niche advantage to have being a lawyer and having a legal background. Um, I I I can't always tell when people are telling the truth or reporting the facts or not, but when I can usually discern whether a politician is willing to lie about other things or willing to speak out of both, sides of their mouth, or, make stuff up, is when I hear them talking about the law and I'm like, you just said this thing that is, I know that's not accurate. Like, that's not how it works. That's not what the law is. So if you're saying that and that's a lie, or at least you're ignorant about that and you're willing to say it with confidence, what else are you willing to do the same? And so I find that that's an advantage, and we need fact checkers out there, I
Yes.
think.
Yes.
And
Yes. Bring back the fact checkers. I can
and you've
remember,
really, oh, go ahead, please.
just going to say, I remember writing for magazine articles, and before it would be published, I get called by a fact checker. It's like, where'd you get this date? Where'd you get this dollar amount? What's your source on this? And they'd say, well, we looked it up, and you got 99 out of 100 words correct about this, but what about that one word? And it sort of takes you back at first, but then it just made you realize it's like, yeah, I did get sloppy with a couple of details in there, and it's a good thing there was a fact checker backing me up, making the point, or the story that I was telling that much better. So I appreciated the fact checkers.
I think having that check and balance, does that caliber of fact checker exist today?
Hmm. I doubt it because, most of the big news publishing operations have shrunk down. They're just on the internet running, a lot of wire copy and a skeleton staff. I think if you walked into a newsroom now, you'd be really surprised. It would, a big paper would resemble the staff of what used to be a local weekly. A handful of reporters and a lot of computer screens. And that's a loss. That's a loss. Where I came from, I would go to a scene and describe what I saw. I would speak to people and make notes about what they said, and basically bring that back for the reader. And there was really no way to argue about it. I was reporting what I saw and what I heard. It was all factual, which is why, thank God for the video cam feature of cameras now. uh, so much truth is being brought out by people who videotaped someone else saying thing, and you're completely surprised because it's the opposite of what they put down in writing or opposite of what they claim to do.
Yeah, and it's even that's unfortunately becoming a house of mirrors, because everybody's got this cell phone that has a camera in their pocket. Everybody can document everything, but when you look at the quality of the deep fake videos that are coming out, even that can be persuasively faked in a way that the average person won't know the difference. Going back to fact checkers for just a minute, what would you say to somebody that says, well, fact checkers really still exist today, and they're there in the form of the people that apply the filters and the censorship to various social media, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so forth?
Hmm. Well, social media, Facebook and Twitter, have made what I think is a commendable effort to shut down sites that are just like posing blatant falsehoods, things that are just provably wrong. But you're not going to catch everybody. They're not really doing it that hard. They're trying to be places where people can say anything, and do get people who just produce falsehoods all the time, and they get kicked off. And in my opinion, deservedly so. But they're kicked off of that medium. You can always start up a website. You can start a blog. You can start, your own hosted video channel.
Does it worry you as a lawyer if you've got taking as a given that suppressing and I'm not saying I endorse this argument. I can see both sides of it, but limiting the bullshit that's out there, especially when people will rely on the bullshit to do things that harm themselves, harm others, harm society. I think there's a good argument to be made that that's good, especially when it can proliferate so quickly. But I guess two questions. One, the free speech implication. I think that's the most obvious argument there from a legal perspective. But two, if you have the perception that there's those watchers on the wall, so to speak, that are like any things that are getting removed are bad, doesn't the inverse of that, if it wasn't removed, if it wasn't flagged, if it wasn't censored, doesn't that strengthen its perceived veracity, even if that's undeservedly the case?
Well, I applaud any social medium that would, that kicks off conspiracy theorists and people who just outright lie. That's destructive. That's damaging. That causes people to riot and burn down buildings. Social media is taking the claim that they're like the mailman or the delivery man. We just provide the transport service for the information to get from one person to you, and so we're not liable for anything that's going on there until they realize, the power that they've got. Old-time newspapers had to be accurate. If you screwed up on a fact, you would get sued for libel. Mm-hmm. And lots of papers were put out of business, and journalists held financially accountable for not sticking with the facts. So I would find it refreshing if Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all the social media would be required to look at themselves as newspapers. It's like, no, you just can't allow this torrent of falsehood and drivel to go out. You're publishing it, so you're responsible for what all these people have to say. And I think you would see, a lot of the bullshit dry up immediately.
Yeah, I mean, how would they even battle that? Right now, they do it selectively, and my question was centered around, they cannot catch every single thing, and they have no incentive to catch everything because the liability is by and large not there. But assuming that the liability stays absent, and they're making somewhat of an effort to enforce it, I guess I worry that the perception of what's left is more credible than it might actually be because of when it's contrasted against what's removed.
Well, you still need to have critical thinking. Ultimately, it's on you, the reader, the consumer of news, as they say nowadays, mm-hmm. that there have been opinion magazines out there since the printing press was invented. And but you had to figure out, it's like, okay, I am reading this from in a liberal publication or a conservative publication, so I'm getting their facts, but I'm also getting their slant. Now, if I've taken the trouble to identify that, well, that's fine. Then I can I can weigh it with the amount of credibility I want to give it.
Hmm.
But I think there's no excuse for just going online and just blathering falsehoods. It's the classic defamatory falsehood. Defamatory, it destroys someone's reputation, and it's false. And there's a lighter standard for elected officials, which is that you have to have an arguably reasonable belief that what you're saying is the truth. Um, and that was always pretty effective against people who were throwing, falsehoods and damaging people with what they're saying.
So your career in legal journalism, um, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about your career in legal too. We're at about 50 minutes already into this recording, and I knew this was going to happen because when you and I get together, we could. I mean, this could be a 5-hour podcast, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we break this into a couple different segments here because
Sure.
I don't know if anybody's going to find our conversation as interesting as I find talking, with you for this length of time. And we can always break this into more segments. I'm going to just need to check my schedule here and make sure I don't have anything that's coming up. I've got some time if you want to keep going with this.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Or we can reconvene. I want to talk about what led you to law school. You were a reporter before you went to law school, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So can we jump into that?
Sure. Typically, news bureaus that were sort of outside of the main office of the paper were in county courthouses. And one of the great sources of news was a trial. If there was a murder trial or if there was somebody very well known on trial, this was news. And I loved covering the courts. And I loved following the attorneys who argued the cases and the prosecutors as well. And I really became fascinated with it. One of the series I did was on municipal courts and how, you could go from one town to another on a particular legal point and get a very different outcome. The municipal courts were just all over the map.
Yep.
And I recall interviewing the dean of Seton Hall Law School and getting his comments about this. This was another story that went on to, the expose of the municipal courts led to an award for me. But even better, the dean of the law school said, hey, a sharp kid like you, you should go to law school. And he said, just if you're interested, send your application to me. So I pounced on that opportunity.
Oh, wow.
And so I was working at the newspaper during the day, and then the evening coming home and taking classes and spending every spare minute of time, including weekends and vacations, reading the law and preparing for exams. And at first, I thought this would be a great thing to practice. I really liked going into court. I know a lot of lawyers don't, but for me, that was what real lawyers did. You filed your brief. First you filed the complaint, and now you had to stand up in court and advocate your point of view, always sticking with the facts and sticking with the law. No fudging allowed. And I really enjoyed that, but I immediately got hired out of law practice by the American Bar Association Journal, and they said, we're looking for lawyers who have commercial journalism experience, and there's really only a handful of them. And so they made me the editor of the ABA Journal, which gave me an opportunity to focus on the law all the time. It was all about law and courts and attorneys and what's happening in the Supreme Court. And it was just endlessly fascinating, to find trends in the law, not to just know the outcome of a particular case, and to see all of the different forms of advocacy and to report on it. And I did that for most of my life for, a host of websites, startup publications, online publications after that. And, I just enjoyed every minute of it. It's like, give me an opinion. I don't care if it's 40 or 400 pages. I'll read it and turn it into a story, and I'll make it interesting to you. So for me, that's a good time.
Yeah, and you've most recently, we did that series of webinars about various mass torts, and the amount of detail and discipline and command of the facts that you brought to that, like that's a lot of data that you've sorted through and you've collated in a way that makes it understandable to the average, not only the average layman, but the average attorney. And I would guess that there are probably attorneys out there that are doing some of the mass torts that you reported on, or at least being maybe a conduit for some of the multi-district litigation cases that know less about their subject matter than you do.
Well, that may be the case, but for me, the fun of it was sort of, growing up with the fact that, well, there are class action lawsuits. And, so you could have a lot of plaintiffs and a lot of defendants. And multi-district litigation was different. You had one issue, one defendant, or most of the time one defendant, and then a bunch of plaintiffs who all had the exact same injury, and they could be expressed in one mass tort lawsuit. And it was also fascinating because of the things so most of it turned out to be over pharmaceuticals and medical devices, but it also had to do with polluted rivers and, corruption. But it was a pretty straightforward way of identifying your defendant and your issue. And then it was just a question of finding clients, which is what marketing was all about. Finding clients who had exactly the same injury, and then trying the issue in court in a bellwether trial. And I just couldn't, stop learning more and more and more about it because new ones were coming up. And it got to the point now where most of the personal injury, or I should say civil litigation in the federal courts is mass torts litigation.
Yeah, and it's turned into big business as well. And it's another one of those like kind of taking something that was very personal and scaling it, I guess, for lack of a better word. But back when you were with the ABA Journal, was the ABA at that time the largest legal organization in the country?
Yes, absolutely. I think we had 750,000 members. There were a lot of members, and it was fascinating because it was all very nicely organized. You could find a truck accident lawyer in Oklahoma or an appellate lawyer in Delaware. It was they had all these sections and committees, so there was just this vast resource of attorneys to tap into.
Yeah, it was really a centralized source of truth. And I remember in my early days subscribing to the Journal, and it was a print publication that would arrive, and I remember reading it from cover to cover. With all the information out there on the internet, I wonder do lawyers still read those magazines from cover to cover?
Well, they read them online now. That's how I get my state bar magazine. And, if you see the print publication, it's probably just a shadow of itself. But, print publications have huge production and distribution costs. Mm-hmm. You're manufacturing all these magazines. It could cost, $5 a copy, and then you have to mail it. Yeah. And the idea was to get the balance so that your subscription costs covered production and distribution, and then the profit to be made was in advertising. And so that was all about circulation. The more circulation you had, the more advertisers you could attract, and you would have a very profitable magazine. And when a lot of the advertising went from print to digital, then you saw, old time fact based journalism start to go into a decline.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
And at that point, I got to know attorneys a lot better. And I could talk to them because I was an attorney, so I had immediate credibility.
Mhm.
And the one problem that everybody had was getting more business, getting more clients. And lawyers, as a rule, are generally you know uh, introverted. They're attracted to law by the intellectual challenge of it. And these are not people who are salespeople. And I was able to build a consulting practice on that lasted for let's see, good 20 years.
Yeah, and I followed you for the whole time, but I learned a lot at a distance. You didn't know who I was at the time, but I certainly knew who you were, and that's the power of the internet. And I felt like a lot of the stuff that I was reading that was coming out of you was speaking directly to me as I was a young attorney navigating this, trying to figure out how to grow my practice and how to navigate this whole thing with integrity. And you spent some time though between the ABA and when you became a consultant in a large law firm, correct?
Yes.
So, how are you doing on time and energy? I know we've been going for a while here. We can always stop and reconvene this at another time, but I want people to hear the rest of your story, whether it's now or whether it's next week or whatever.
Well, sure. Let's do it now.
Okay.
I I had been working for news publications and in the end, sort of legal publications uh, for a while, and it wasn't a field that was particularly stable or a place where you could hold down a job, for the rest of your life.
Hmm.
But it turned out that there was a big overlap between journalism and marketing. You knew how to write, you knew how to pick words, how to express something. I always had a fascination with words, which I got from my dad. And, English is such a wonderful language. There can maybe be 5 words that all mean the same thing with a little bit of a different shade. And I was interviewing for a job to be the administrator or executive director of the Association of Legal Administrators. And I didn't get that job, but one of the interviewers was the administrator of Sidley and Austin, which at the time was the biggest law firm in Chicago, one of the biggest law firms in the world.
How
And he
many
said,
attorneys?
you're not cut out to be an administrator, but we could sure use a marketing guy. And I said, terrific. Yeah, what do you want me to do? And they go like, we have no idea. Why don't you write a job description and we'll approve it if we see anything unless there's something amiss. And so I
How
basically
many?
wrote my own job description.
That's an amazing story, and it's for Sidley and Austin to recognize the need, but be able to admit that they didn't really kind of know what they needed. That's pretty rare too. Having talked with many medium and large size firms about what they do in their marketing. How big was Sidley and Austin at that point in terms of number of attorneys?
Oh, at the time it was 750 lawyers.
Hmm.
And their big problem was that because they never talked to the press, only time they made it into the press is when somebody was sniping at them
Hmm.
or being snarky with them. And I thought, oh, I know how to solve this problem. I'll just start meeting some reporters and introduce them, take them out to lunch, bring them into the firm so that the partners could meet them and establish some kind of rapport. And they really liked that.
Hmm.
And it gave me an opportunity to sort of figure out, well, what are some other ways that we can market the firm outside of making friends with the press and ending sort of an unspoken war. And I still remember when I first going in and telling the managing partner, it said, there's this new thing called the internet, and
Yeah.
we need to have a website. And at the time, they were very skeptical. It was like, well, some of these websites are called like Yahoo or Google. What's that? And I said, I don't know, but I know it's the next big thing, and we've got to be on it from day one.
Uh-huh.
And then it was just a matter of lining up people at the firm to write material. We already had an internal newsletter, and I said, well, let's put this out there. Let's show what we can do. Let's show off our best stuff. And it was a slow process, but eventually they came along on the ride with me.
To move a firm of 10 lawyers to do something novel is almost an act of God. To move a firm of 700 plus lawyers to do that, you say it like, okay, it just, it kind of, I pushed, I gave them the ideas, and it happened. I imagine that wasn't easy though, was it?
Well, you can't just get 700 people to, agree on any point, particularly if they're very smart, highly educated, well-trained, attorneys in a big firm.
Yep.
These were no people to mess around with. They were very good at what they do. So I focused on the marketing partner to whom I reported, and it was great because, he knew everything about the firm, and felt that his job was it's just like, go ahead and try new things, and if you make a mistake, I'll be in touch with you and let you know. And then of course the administrator who hired me did a similar kind of role, and it was really kind of fun because they would say, well, these two lawyers are married, or these two lawyers are dating, or whatever gossip was going on. And then I introduced the managing partner to the internet, and I just sort of showed him how to use it. It's like, look, you click here, and then you can go somewhere else, and then you can look up whatever you're interested in. And so I built a fan club of people in influential positions, people on the management committee, showed them new things, showed them basically what I had to show them is there's no downside. Because if I said, hey, let's do this project, there's all these benefits and so forth, they're very skeptical. And they would always ask, what's the downside? And so I would thoroughly research that part. And the downside would always be, very remote. It was, a proven approach, and why one of our competitors was doing it already, and they were making us look bad. And so that's how you pitched an idea at a big law firm like that.
Yeah, that's it's a whole different thing than small law firms. And so and you've worked with a lot of small law firms, and I imagine firms of in between sizes. What do you see as the major differences, and which having gone through the whole gauntlet of firm sizes and types, what's your favorite to work with?
Gee, I would say a firm of about 30 lawyers, which would, or smaller, just simply because it's easier to get a consensus. And, it's less subject to internal politics. But you're right. I mean, I advised a law firm that had 3,000 attorneys. And a solo practitioner reached out to me, and I worked with him as well. I was really pretty happy to work with anybody who could help me earn a living and who needed some help. The size of the firm really just determines what sort of cases you take and what sort of issues you're going to be working on. The common denominator in all of that is the, attorney personality. Attorneys are very fact-based. They're very risk-averse, generally introverted, and that for me was I saw an opening. I would talk to attorneys who were very good at what they do, but they would just say, I don't know how to talk to people. How do I make people like me?
Mhm.
I can't seem to find anybody who will hire me. All my cases are being referred to me by the higher ups at the firm, and I want to have my own client base. And the common denominator to what I told all of them is, well, you're selling. You're pushing yourself on other people, and you're talking about yourself, and no one is interested in that. And a better approach is to ask questions. Uh, what the other person is up to is their number one topic. And if you can get them talking, you are actually selling, and you can sort of manipulate the conversation in a friendly way to, well, what are the issues that you're concerned with? What are the problems you have that have a legal solution? And if the better you could steer it in that direction, the more business you got. And the reason that they hired you is not where you went to law school or how many bar associations you belonged to or how distinguished you were. It was how well you could relate to them. And that was really the key. Is when you're meeting other people, it's not a speech. You're not talking about yourself. It's an interview. You want to get the other person talking, and and you also need to look in the right places. You want to look at current clients. If they have a problem now, chances are they might have two problems. Another one was referral sources. Look for somebody who's kind of your mirror image. They do, maybe they're a transaction lawyer and all you do is in court, and you would think, well, you really have nothing to do with each other, but you can send business back and forth, and it's a business relationship. Join client organizations, figure out where is it that your clients gather. The happy attorneys are the ones who went out and picked their clients and sought them out and said, this organization is really interesting. I want to work for them. And you just go to where they gather, which is business events, and get to know people, become an active participant in an association, and then finally, identify, make up your list. Whom would you like to work for, and what kind of issues do they have? Who's your ideal client? Who would be fun to work for? Just because they're talking about something that's innately interesting, and seek out that client. But pursue them, take them out to lunch, meet them for coffee or for breakfast, come to their office and ask for a tour. That sort of thing. And that's how you'll get clients that you like. And if you have clients that are liking and they're paying you, it's like what I had in journalism. They would publish my story and give me money. What could be better than that?
It's what you just described. It's been a constant throughout my practice. I started right as the internet was really becoming somewhat of a viable idea for attracting clients. And so a lot of the networking stuff, a lot of the meeting people and listening and cultivating referrals and stuff. And we are constantly coaching Lawlytics members on, as you're communicating, whether it's through your website or social media or whatever, it isn't about you. And you need to understand that people are never going to care about how much you know until they know how much you care.
That's
And
right.
I think that's lost on a lot of attorneys and a lot of people in general, but as especially, we know what we know as attorneys, and, we're able to very quickly filter through what facts are relevant and what facts aren't. But it's the kind of filler details where the emotional stuff lives, where the referrals happen, and where the bonding happens that make clients not only want to hire an attorney, but trust an attorney to the point where there's a good relationship. And so expectations are set well from the beginning and managed throughout. And I know that that's been your message throughout, at least for as long as I've been following you. How coachable did you find most attorneys that you delivered this message to and worked closely with?
Well, it's a mixed bag. Not everybody had what I would call, the intestinal fortitude to do it. I would tell lawyers, there's no business here in the office. There's no new clients to be found. Every client in here is already represented by somebody. You need to get out of the office. You got to, have a social life. Go for a coffee. Go out to lunch. Don't work through lunch. That's a valuable time to get to know other people. The successful ones, I saw the fact that, you start by calling on people and just make it a habit of getting to know people. Meet people at conferences, and just use little techniques like always ask for a business card. You don't want to push your card on somebody, but if you ask them for a card, that's an opportunity for you to give them your card. Yeah, of course, it's all done electronically now.
Right.
But the idea is, you would look at it, comment on it, and then engage them, like how long have you been in this position? How's the company doing? Have you ever run into a problem with this particular legal issue? And then on the back of it, I would always write down where I was, what the date was, and a little bit about what we talked about. And so I kept, I had like thousands of names in my contact list. So if someone called out of the blue, I could look them up on a snap, and I would remember, it's like, oh yeah, I saw you on January 1st. We were at this New Year's Eve party, and this is what we talked about. And people like that. People like it when you remember stuff about them. And probably the biggest success I had was with a Chicago law firm of about 50 attorneys. And the marketing director called me in. They had tiers of partners. You were an associate, and then you became an income partner, but you could not become a full partner unless you had your own, flock of clients who would basically, pay your salary. Mm-hmm. And at the end of a training program, I got a number of people to practice what I talked about. I had them draw up plans, and, I was the guy who called up and said, well, you said you were going to call this person. Did you do that? You were going to join this association. Did you do that? And they did. And within 1 year, they increased their revenue by $1.7 million. And the partners called up the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, which did a story about it. And, I made sure to include that story in a lot of the pitches that I would do. But it's all nuts and bolts. You can't pick up new business by osmosis. You have to go out there and be among the clients and ask questions. And the rest will just fall into place for you.
I agree. It's all about relationships, and that's
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that I've long admired about your ability to really strike up a conversation and strike up friendships with really anybody, and just being able to bring their story out, get them talking, get them thinking, and then in turn I see them responding to and listening to you. Now, you've obviously done a whole lot of other things. We probably don't have the bandwidth to cover all of the individual things. And I'd love to have you back on at some time in the near future to go maybe into more detail on some of these topics.
I would be absolutely delighted. Let me know when you want to talk. I mean, you and I get along so well. I think it would be a pleasure.
I agree. So to wrap up today, I'd like to know two things. One is, what's next for Larry Bodine now that you're retired? And two, what advice would you give to somebody just getting started in their own practice, whether they're right out of law school or whether they are maybe going from being an employee to owning their own thing?
If you're just starting out, you got to read a book that came out in 1935 by Dale Carnegie, which is How to Make Friends and Influence People. That was the book that's where I got the whole idea about asking questions and inquiring about other people and looking for something in common so you could kind of chime in, and right away, the more they tell you, the more you can find that you have in common. And the other one is an old book by the ABA called How to Start and Build a Law Firm by Jay Thunberg.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is sort of nuts and bolts practical stuff like, oh, you have to have a budget and an accounting system. And but he would include a lot of little interesting things such as, don't go online and buy all your office equipment. Go to a local store where you can buy from somebody that you meet in person. The same thing with, your accounting services. Find an accountant to do your work who maybe can also refer business to you. And it's all practical nuts and bolts. And then the key thing, of course, is you got to find clients that you like, people who are doing something interesting to you that you would be just thrilled to learn more about and to represent, to help them with any legal problems.
Those are great pieces of advice. Those books, I mean, those are universal. So I discovered Jay Thunberg's book in the law library when I was in law school. It set me on the path and led me to where I am today. I read Dale Carnegie's book, and I remember right after I read it, I tried it on a lawyer friend of mine who had come over with his wife, and the guy never stopped talking anyway. So I'm like, I'm just gonna keep it going and ask him about, his stuff. And yes. I think I said maybe 5 minutes worth of words to his 2 or 3 hours. And by the end, he's like, this is one of the best conversations I've ever had.
Exactly. Okay. They thought you were a brilliant conversationalist.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So what's next, Larry, for you?
Oh, gosh. I think I've gotten to the place in life where, I want to be. I can take on all sorts of volunteer opportunities if I'd like to. I can get outside and just enjoy the beautiful countryside here in Tucson. I like taking classes. That's a key thing. You gotta keep your mind active. So I try to do that all the time. And another key part to being retired is you got to have a social life. You got to have people that you go out with and spend time with. So if it's a choice of going to a Zoom call or meeting people for lunch, I'm going to the live event. Mm-hmm. And the very best things that have occurred to me in my life have sought me out. Even in my darkest hours when I was broke or up to my eyeballs in debt, it was someone else who just happened to cross my path, or I was out and about or at an event and I ran into somebody, and lo and behold, it turned into a wonderful and profitable relationship. I hate to use the word profitable. It's a prosperous relationship. And so if that opportunity is out there, I'm wide open and ready to receive it. But at this point, for me, the golden years are the golden years. I'm having the time of my life. And, there's an old Buddhist saying that I like to quote, and that is, may all sentient beings know happiness, and may all sentient beings be free from suffering. And that's kind of my baseline. I'm looking for an opportunity to be generous and a chance to be compassionate.
Larry, that says it all. And I think that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being part of my life and being an influence on it. And let's dive into some other details in another conversation sometime soon.
Absolutely. Just let me know when.